Good morning to you, Aisha, and thank you for coming in. So, how much power will the new president of Ethiopia wield? Because this is, I understand, a largely ceremonial role.
Very much a ceremonial role, so it's largely a symbolic thing. She will be responsible, for example, for the opening of parliament, for the appointment of ambassadors or ratifying the appointment of ambassadors, etc. But she won't really have executive powers. Those rest with the current Prime Minister, Abiy. But he has shown some foresight in appointing at least half of his 20-member cabinet, women to half the positions in his 20-member cabinet. He's instituted some sweeping reforms, including gender reforms, and now this appointment is a very strong signal, not only to Ethiopia, but also the rest of the region, that he wants to improve the gender quota. He's also appointed her largely, not only because of her gender, but also because she's not part of that inside cabal in Ethiopian politics generally at present. And so it will hopefully help to eliminate fears of domination of the government by one ethnic or political group.
You spoke about how she's going to be responsible for the appointment of diplomats, and that's a space where Sahle-Work Zewde worked for over 30 years.
Yes.
How important then is it at a time when Ethiopia under President Abiy Ahmed says it is reforming, it is changing, to tap into experience such as hers?
Very, very important. She's had experience not only as a diplomat herself, as an ambassador herself to Senegal and France, but also to the African Union as part of the UN. So she's been the UN's appointee, or the Secretary General's appointee to the African Union. And she's also headed the UN office in Nairobi in Kenya. This wealth of experience, not only as an ambassador, but also at the intergovernmental level, is important, particularly because Ethiopia houses the African Union headquarters on the continent. So I think that breadth of experience will be very important when it comes to selecting the right representatives for specific ambassadorial appointments.
For those of us not too familiar with Ethiopian politics and the ethnic issues, give us a quick sense of just the issues that she will need to bear in mind as she takes on this new role and the potential challenges that lie ahead.
I think the biggest challenge for her will be Ethiopia's very authoritarian style of government, very bureaucratic and also authoritarian, although, of course, in some ways that makes it easier to make sweeping changes. The other huge challenge is that this is a very conservative society. Across tribal lines, across ethnic lines, across regional and linguistic lines, Ethiopia is a deeply conservative, deeply patriarchal society. So she is going to come in for a fair amount of criticism from men in powerful positions, and particularly where the economic nexus meets the political one. So she's going to have to deal with that. Ethiopia is a country where they've made strides, for example, in the education of girls, but haven't made many strides in the paid labor of women. So many Ethiopian women are actually employed on farms, for example, but their labor is unpaid. These are areas where if she does focus in on them, hone in on them, she could make radical change that could really change the fabric of Ethiopian society over the next decade or so.
President Abiy Ahmed took over April this year.
Yes.
And in this time that he's been in office, the few months, he's already pushed ahead with the 50% representation of women in the parliament. But not everyone is happy. So if he's making these reform changes, and he's already mentioned the fact that there could be elections in Ethiopia as soon as 2020, how much time does that give him to implement these reforms, and how do they hold should he not last beyond 2020?
I think his objective is to make these changes now and to make appreciable gains in various sectors, including gender representation. And if those gains are actually registered by the electorate, he is hoping that that will be his ticket to another term in office. If that doesn't happen, and of course that's always a big if anywhere on the continent, anywhere in the world really, if that doesn't happen and we go back to a more conservative governing coalition or governing party, currently we have a coalition in there, governing party in Ethiopia, we may see a regression of these advances. But there are also very, very vocal activists, not only in Ethiopia, but in the region generally. And I think Mr. Abiy Ahmed's biggest selling point right now is the relative peace he has brought to the long-standing war of attrition between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Everybody in the region, and certainly most people in those two countries, want to see that peace endure. And that is perhaps the one big legacy that he will leave. And I would say that's probably, very probably, his ticket to winning the next election.
More broadly then, on women leaders, the skeptics are saying Work Zewde's appointment, while great, doesn't automatically mean that we will see Ethiopia begin to advance a pro-women agenda, because even in the workplace, having Aisha as a woman leader does not necessarily mean that she is there in the interest of women.
Of other women. Given Sahle-Work Zewde's track record within the UN particularly, where she was seen to appoint women to her staff particularly, I think we may see a difference here. I also think really that we tend to be a little bit unfair when it comes to how we judge female leaders, because there's so few of them. Whenever they make a mistake or an error, we kind of jump on it, and we're not really cognizant of the fact that our male leaders make precisely the same errors, precisely the same kinds of mistakes, and we jump on the women because we somehow hold them to a higher standard, and perhaps that's unfair. We've had Joyce Banda and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf as executive heads of state on the continent, Amina Gurib as a ceremonial president in Mauritius until quite recently. All three of them have made advances, but they were harshly criticized whenever they were perceived to have fallen from the standard that we were trying to hold them to. So I think that we need to be more self-reflective there and realize that our political systems across the continent and indeed globally are such that it's very, very difficult for any person of integrity, of real integrity, male or female, to actually avoid the traps of bribing and being bribed, nepotism, cronyism, and buying into existing patriarchal standards. So while I think symbolically this is a great appointment, and while we hope to see some real reform in Ethiopia and indeed in the region, I think we need to really ask ourselves, are we holding these women leaders to a higher standard just because they're women? And given the overarching patriarchy on the continent, is that fair?
Does it matter then that Sahle-Work Zewde came into this position through a vote among the political elite, and that it's not by a public mandate as was with the Prime Minister?
No, I think it doesn't matter. I think the Prime Minister, one of his powers is to appoint that ceremonial president. So it's a vote of confidence in him to appoint the right person to the job. It's also really a vote of confidence that we've seen on social media, for example. Twitter and other social media platforms have been lit, really, with support for this move, hailing it as an advance for women. As I said before, it's a symbolic advance. We hope that that symbolism will be translated into real action, but even if it isn't, it's important.
Aisha Kaji, thank you so much for your time.